by undoing this set screw and sliding the frame up and down. If you break a blade and you have a short piece, you can, change the depth of this to use the broken piece of blade. Most of the time I throw a broken blade away, but sometimes you get attached to them. When you first set up your frame, I like to put the top of the blade right where this horizontal bar is and set my saw so that the bottom of the blade is at the top of this curved area, and then tighten it, because that'll help you tension your blade in the frame. Then, when you get your blades, you'll notice they come in a tiny little thin wire wrapped in a bundle. You need to undo that wire you'll find a loose end at one end, and if you can get the tail free, you can pull it out of the top of the bundle. So you free the end of the wire, and then it'll untwist. Don't take it all the way off unless you have a container to put these blades in, because they support and protect each other in the bundle. So I always go down to the bottom wrap where you'll see there's no teeth down at this part, and then I pull one out. And then I just spin this back. And I keep track of my saw blades for my toolkit in drinking straws. I make little tubes that open on one end. I write the number of the saw blade on there, and I just put the bundles inside. And that way I can carry a wide variety of blades protected with me whenever I'm doing a workshop. So, threading the saw frame. This blade will only cut if the teeth are in the right direction. Think of a Christmas tree with the saw blade. You're going to hold your frame like this, and if you look at the blade really close, this is an extreme close-up of this blade, you'll see that they angle like a Christmas tree. You want the teeth to point down, 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 because when it goes through the metal, this is where it'll cut and go. This is the sharp edge of the blade right here. So, blown up view of this little blade, that's what it looks like. Also, if you look at under magnification, if you turn your teeth of your blade toward you, you'll see that half of them angle one way, and it's like every other one angles in a different direction. That is to allow the little chips of metal that you're creating when you saw to fall away from the blade and not clog the teeth. So it's always fun to take a really close look at your saw blade to see this. That's called the tooth set. And the cut that you make in the metal while you're sawing is called the kerf. So now I'm going to show you how to thread your saw. So to thread your saw frame, you want the teeth to aim. I usually hold it in my offhand because I'm right-handed. So you want the teeth to aim down and away from the opening of the frame. Then turn everything to face you. I always put the top of the blade in first, all the way at the top till it can't wiggle anymore. You want to make sure that the blade and the back of the saw frame are roughly parallel. You don't want it angled way out or angled way in. You want it to be as parallel as you can get it. Then you need to tension the blade, because if the blade is wobbly in there, it's going to break against the metal. So to tension it, you can use your sternum. I like to use my hip bone. And you're just going to push the handle of the frame in a little bit and grab a hold of that blade. And then that's the sound you want to hear. If it's loose in there, I'll do it loose on purpose. It'll be a lower pitch. So the way to tell your blade is tight enough is you want that sort of high C. Ding, ding, ding. And you'll notice that the horizontal parts of the frame are torqued in toward each other now. That blade's nice and tight in there, and it's not going to bounce around on the metal when you're cutting. So that's a well-threaded saw frame. Now that we have a well-threaded saw blade, saw frame, we are going to learn to saw some simple lines. You'll find this pattern on jewelrymakingdaily.com. Print it out, trim it, and follow the directions for adhering it to the metal according to which hand you saw with. This is your bench pin. You want to make sure when you're sawing that you have the flat side on the top because you want as much of your metal supported as possible when you're sawing. The angled side is more for filing because you're going to be pushing upward with a file, and we'll cover that later on. So flip your bench pin around and make sure you've got the flat top up. You want to make sure that there's no kinks or bends or bad creases in your metal. I can see that this one's got a little bit of a curve in it, so I'm just going to put it between these two steel bench blocks and flatten it with a mallet to take the curvature out of the metal. Good. And I'm going to start with a straight line. I'm right-handed, so I want my waste metal on the left side so my left hand can hold it. If I were left-handed, I would turn this pattern around and hold the waste metal with my right hand so I could saw this way. A good thing to remember when you're sawing is always look just ahead of the blade, and then you will saw to the line rather than getting hypnotized by the moving blade. When I start a cut is the only time I'm going to angle my blade like this. I put my thumb over the back of the blade. There's no teeth back here. So I put my thumb against the line where I want to start, put my thumb and push away from myself to make a little nick in the edge of the metal. Then at all times when you are sawing, think of a sewing machine. This blade is moving up and down, straight up and down, like a sewing machine needle. You don't ever push it, you don't ever twist it, you don't ever turn it, you don't ever angle it back. Think of this as a sewing machine needle, just up and down, up and down. You want your wrist to be relaxed. You don't need a death grip on the handle because you will twist the blade and break it. So once you've got that little nick, you're going to start, and I'm going to saw this. This is a great practice pattern because you'll have a straight line, then a gently curved line, then you get to turn corners, then you get to do switchbacks. So this is a terrific pattern if you're just learning, and I'd suggest starting on about 20 gauge aluminum because it's easy to cut and it's inexpensive. You can saw for 3 weeks for $3. Aluminum's a great practice metal. The positioning of your hands is important when you're sawing too because you want to steer the metal, not the blade. So I always use a V-grip around my blade, and the point of this V, the further you are in, the more your metal is supported. So I scooch it back to about there, and then I'm just going to look ahead of the blade and go. And you'll see that I have a nice relaxed grip. I'm sawing as the entire length of the blade. You don't want to do that because you'll wear out those teeth in that one section. You want to try and use the entire blade. Just put your feet flat on the floor, breathe, relax, and saw. Now, when you get to the very end of your line, you want to go a little slower and a little gentler, and you just go right through like that. And that's sawing a straight line. Once you've mastered sawing straight and gently curved lines, you're going to run into a situation where you need to drastically change direction. Again, I'd suggest downloading this pattern off of jewelrymakingdaily.com and practicing until you can cut all the way across it without breaking blades. So I'm going to skip over the gently curved line, assuming that you've practiced that enough, and we're going to do the zigzag because that's a real blade breaker for most beginners. When you get to complex lines like this, it's a good idea to put some saw lubricant on the back of your blade. I never put it on the front because it will clog the teeth. I just run a little line on the back of the blade and it will work its way around in the kerf. That's the cut that the saw blade is making. So again, I'm going to start my cut by making a little nick. And I'm right-handed, so I'm holding my waste metal in the left hand. And I'm going to motor to the point of this zigzag. Now when we get here, this is usually the point where people don't know what to do. How do you change such a radical direction? If you twist the blade, it will break. If you back it out, you can't get to that without wasting metal. So the trick to changing direction that radically is you don't want to use the entire length of the blade. This is the only time that you would saw your blade up and down tiny like this. And you're going to steer the metal, not the saw. You're just going to use a couple of teeth and gently pivot the metal, and it will create a round opening around the blade. And shazam, your 90-degree difference. And now you can just saw straight away from yourself again. We're going to do the same thing again. Gently turn the metal slowly. And we're going to go straight off again. The idea with sawing is to try and always saw away from yourself as long as you possibly can, and then change direction. Always saw straight away from yourself. And remember, the blade is like a sewing machine, straight up and down, relaxed at all times. And this is something you can probably, fade or cut, whatever. I'm just going to saw to the end because I'm on a roll. There we go. Very often you will snarl a blade in your metal because you're pushing unevenly on both sides of the cut, and it will trap the blade in the kerf. Your blade will get really stuck in there because the metal is twisted around it and against it. It's a good idea to just loosen the set screws and get the blade free of the saw frame. Then get a pair of pliers and pull that snarled blade out of there before you go further. Another thing that's important to know too is that you can always say the back of your metal hits the frame and you need to approach the cut from a different angle. How you free your blade from a pattern in progress is to undo the bottom screw, pull the blade out, and then reposition the metal and cut in from a different direction. You can always undo one side of the saw. I prefer to do the bottom one because it's easier to retension the blade again if the bottom is loose like this. If you are sawing a really complex design and your metal snarls around your blade, if you try and force it out of there, it will break. So a good thing to do is, if you've got a tight grip on it and the blade won't move, let go with the supporting hand and just pull down on the frame a little bit like that, and it's usually enough to free the blade from the snarl. Unless you've really twisted the metal a lot, then you're going to break the blade. But most of the time, the best approach to a stuck saw blade that hasn't broken yet is to let go and just pull down gently on the frame, and it'll usually free it. Once you've sawn out your pattern, you're going to need to clean up your edges, because regardless of how good you are at sawing, you're always going to have little burrs. The saw blade will produce a little raised ridge of metal where you're cutting through, and you'll have lines from the teeth of the saw blade. So this is where you can make friends with files and sandpaper. I'm going to start with the straight ones because they're the easiest ones to get a handle of. Curves are a little more practice, but you will run into situations where you need to use many different kinds of files to clean your edges up, and sandpaper. So we'll start at the bench pin. When you're sawing, you want the flat top. When you're filing, you want to switch it around to the angled top. And the reason for this is because your natural inclination when filing is to lift up at the end of the stroke. So if you have the angled bench pin, it's going to take advantage of your natural arm action anyway at this angle. So I'm going to start with, you want to try and match the profile of the edge that you're cleaning to the profile of the file that you're going to use. So these are all just straight lines. I'm going to use a flat file. A lot of people put handles on their files. I don't, because I have huge hands and I'm never bothered by the file. If you have smaller hands, this part of the file can push into your hand. Some of them are very pointed, but these are really comfortable files for me, and I have giant hands. It's never bothered me not have a handle on my files. It's important to always support your metal when filing. You want as much support in as many places as you can get when you're filing, because then the contact of the file against the metal, you're not going through the air like this. You can support the metal and make a nice clean stroke with the file. There's two schools of thought on filing. I learned that you file in one direction away from you, pick up the file, come back to the beginning of the stroke, and do it again. Some people go back and forth like this. I was told that wears down your teeth and your file, and I learned to file in one direction. So, you know, it's up to you, up to how you want to treat your tools, up to what's comfortable for you. So I'm going to file in one direction. So you want to try and use all of the file, just like the saw blade. You want to use all of your tool to wear it evenly. And push away from you. Another thing I do is I observe the edge, and you'll see the metal change. It'll get an even shine to it all the way across. Then you know you've filed enough in that direction. So I'm going to go a couple more strokes. Then I turn it around 90 degrees. Sometimes holding it is very interesting. This is where your bench pin becomes a tool for you. You can use this edge. And go a couple of strokes this way. And you can see how the sheen on that cut edge will change as you file. It gets shinier and shinier. Then you know you've got all the hills and valleys out of it. And that's looking pretty good. So that's a straight edge. For a curved edge like this, you want to try, for an outside curve like this, you can use the flat file. The thing that's different about a curve is you are going to move the metal as you file. So you want to try, I like to go on the edge of my pin like this and try and pivot the metal as I go. That way it's supported on this side, it's supported from underneath, but I'm trying to match the contour of the cut as well as I can. And I'm getting a pretty decent edge on there. You know, you can go around the edges like this. And again, you'll see I'm trying to support this as much as possible. Sometimes I don't like to do this, but sometimes you will have to go perpendicular to that curved edge. I don't like to do that because it creates a flat spot. So as often as I can, I try and go with the narrow edge of the curve. Sometimes you cannot avoid it, and you have to do it this way. So again, I try and keep it as close to the edge of the pin as possible to support it, and I pick up at the end of the stroke. And that got that bump out right there. For inside curves like this, you have to use a curved file. I've got a half round file in here. Oh, and files. I should talk, this is a good time to talk about files. Files come in different cuts. The distance between the teeth, which are the cutting edges of the file, are different. Sometimes they're parallel lines, sometimes they cross each other. They come in different cuts, ranging from 0 to 6, with the finer files being the higher numbers. These are cut 1, so they're pretty coarse. They're also large files. Then they also have needle files to get into, this is a flat needle file. To get into tiny little spots like this, you would use needle files. They come in many different shapes, many different profiles. The best thing to do is buy a flat, a half round, a round, and a triangle file. Play with them for a while and then see where your work tells you to go before you buy more files. Because there's crazy files in my file sets like this. I've never used them because they don't fit with my work. So it's good when you're buying tools to start with the basics and then build your toolkit according to how your work tells you to go. So back to the inside. This is curved. You need